So greetings. My name is Calvin Kennedy, and I'm presiding priest of the Sons of Ra Ministries and a co-founder of the Sacred Order of the Sons of Ra. And we're here at the Ka Studio at the Crass Unity Center of African Spiritual Science. And I'm here with my brother and colleague, Dr. Jahi Issa. I'm so happy to have you here today. And I'm going to give a little bit of background about Jahi quickly. Jahi and I actually go back to almost 20 years. I don't know if you realize that, but it made me think about it a couple of days ago. I said, wow, I've known this brother almost 20 years.
Yeah, 2 decades, yeah.
2 decades. In 1995, when you came here, I think visiting one of your friends from one of the historically black colleges, which we're going to be talking about from TSU, Greg, I believe.
Yeah, Greg. Yeah.
Right. We met, and I think something just, we connected. And you came to a Kwanzaa party that we had like immediately thereafter, and from that point on, certain things started to coalesce. Me meeting you and then meeting Dr. Salim Faraji, out of that whole relationship and dynamic, the Sons of Ra Ministries came forward in the Sacred Order of the Sons of Ra. And so we proudly acknowledge you as a co-founder of that. But of course, you've been doing so many other things in addition to that. You are, at the time, I think you were finishing up your master's degree, and then you were heading into your doctoral studies. And I'm also happy to say that I was able to come and participate when you graduated from Howard University.
Yeah, my PhD, yes.
Right, and I think I was there. Was I there in 2006 or 2005? I think the ceremony was in 2006.
No, 2005.
So the ceremony was in 2005.
Right.
Wow, time really flies. So currently, or we won't say currently, but in this present time, you were recently assistant professor of history and Africana Studies at Delaware State University.
Right.
And you're also the former North Carolina grassroots coordinator for President Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign.
Yes.
And from my understanding, you were actually featured in the New York Times for the organizing you did for that initial campain.
Right. A reporter from the New York Times did come down and do a feature caricature on me, and it was pretty funny, but it was pretty serious, because we did a lot of work and working with the Democratic Party and trying to ensure that President Obama was elected president.
Now, you were in North Carolina at that time. You were at Elizabeth City State University.
Right, where I was a professor of history.
Right. And I think I got an opportunity to visit you there as well. And you were also, one thing about you, Jahi, is everywhere you've gone, I think you've organized something. You've organized so many different groups of people as well. And interestingly enough, your path, starting from, St. Louis, and you've gone to all of the HBCUs, and then not all of them, but your career in particular, you've actually gone to 3 separate different HBCUs, and HBCUs, of course, being an historically black college and university. And then recently, and the reason that we're coming together to create this DVD to get the word out on not just what you've been experiencing personally, which is also very powerful story, but also what's happening that's really threatening Black America. And so what I'd like to do is to kind of open it up to let you talk a little bit about your motivation when you got to Delaware State University, and what is it, because you wrote an article in 2011 that I think changed a lot of things for you. Interestingly enough, you had just helped get the first black president elected, and then you find yourself writing an article that you titled, and I quote, "How Black Colleges Are Turning White, the Ethnic Cleansing of African Americans in the Age of Obama." So why don't we go maybe into what it is that motivated you to start on that article, and then we'll kind of bring it back to some other.
Well, the title, when I finished the article, we were looking for something that was provocative, right? We wanted a title that would be extremely provocative, that would catch the eye of not only people in the United States, but people in the world. And ethnic cleansing is that's a United Nations mandate that says, hey, that's against United Nations law to ethnically cleanse a group of people. And in fact, the United States intervened in the wars in Eastern Europe and Kosovo because a group of people there were being ethnically cleansed. And so ethnically cleansed is not just you are raping or pillaging or killing a group of people, but also culturally, where you're denying that group of people the right to education in their own cultural forms that they themselves choose to do. Right? So that title, we carefully chose that title, and we carefully chose to put in the age of Obama, because this period of his presidency was so historic, not just nationwide, but globally. And so we wanted to give it that emphasis. And of course, the rest is history. We had no idea of what we were getting into and what the ultimate consequences would be. So yes.
So that's interesting, because we talk about higher education and education, and I know that those of us that have studied our history have seen how once slavery ended in this country, the first thing that the freed slaves, the Africans, the enslaved Africans, the formerly enslaved Africans wanted to achieve was education. But we were talking earlier, and you said, really, African culture has always been about education, going back even to ancient times. So maybe would you like to just talk a little bit about that? Like, what is the foundation for education?
Yeah. I mean, humanity itself, when the first Homo sapiens or Homo erectus and those early humanoids began to compete with other animals, mammals, for food, right? You had to be educated for that. A lion just doesn't wake up and goes out and catches a gazelle. He or she has to be educated on that. A cheetah, an elephant, right? So that education is about survival, how a group of people survive. Birds are educated on how to survive. Squirrels are educated on how to survive. So it's a process of just being a living being. You have to be educated. So in Africa, especially after the what we call the Great Migration periods, where in the invention of agriculture, that changed humanity forever. Because 17,000 years ago, before that, we were all hunter and gatherers, right? And so once we invented agriculture, it's a science to grow a crop and to domesticate animals. That was a very important science that led to a population explosion. And with that, we were settled down and we can think, right? And that's why most civilizations are always centered around waterbeds, where food, because the essence of food and agriculture is water, right? And you'll see among these waterbeds these ancient buildings and dwellings where people are, and pottery, right? So education is key. So all of this starts in Africa with ancient Egypt, the first Egyptian dynasty, but we can even go to pre-dynastic Egypt. And so in this process now you have groups of different ethnic groups, possibly with different languages, who are coming together, combining their knowledge, which form the first universal form of education. This is all happening in ancient Egypt. And then from there, we have the educational systems that propped up in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. But all of this is coming from Africa, with African people, heavy melanated people. And so even with the decline of ancient Egypt, when you had Carthage and Hannibal, they had a very strong educational system. And then if you go back even to the ancient civilization, we can move across the Sahara, right, where the ancient Egyptians actually came from. And you go into what is now known as Ghana and the Western Sudan. That was the ancient empire of Ghana. And then Songhai, Mali and Songhai, where you had the famous, one of the oldest universities in the world that is still in existence. It's not in Europe, it's not in China, it's right in Africa. Timbuktu, the University of Sankora in Timbuktu, where millions of books were produced. not only in Arabic, but some we're now finding that many of these ethnic groups had their own indigenous written scripts. And so many of our people who were forcibly brought over to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade, or as we like to call the Great Ma'afa, right? We were coming with an education. We were brought here culturally equipped, and we resisted this form of human bondage as any group would do. And so our entire sojourney during enslavement was, how do we re-educate ourselves in this new land? And if you read the narratives of Frederick Douglass and how he was able to read, and we now know that even during enslavement, 15 to 20% of all enslaved people could read. Even under these harsh circumstances where it was illegal to read. You could be killed. You could be whipped to death to read. So,
or to teach someone to read.
Or to teach someone to read.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that was power, to be able to communicate, to read the written word, to spell, a science.
So what actually created the what we now call today historically black colleges and universities?
Well, some of the universities were created during enslavement, where you had a large amount of freed people in this country, right? So even at the apex of enslavement, from the end of the 18th century up to the Civil War, you had several 100,000 African people, or people of color as they were called then, who had independent schools, right? And so these schools started from the churches, the black church. And we look at the AME. I was at an AME convention right here yesterday in Los Angeles. And the schools that they set up.
Richard Allen.
Right. They were right in the churches.
Mm-hmm.
They set up colleges there. Mm-hmm. And so this had nothing to do with, a lot of people think that all historically black colleges were created from the government. No.
Yeah, you mentioned one in Missouri. Is it Lincoln or something?
Yeah, or even Lincoln University.
Right.
Where I'm from. I'm from the Ferguson, Missouri area. Born and raised, University City. And Lincoln University is one of two historically black colleges and universities in St. Louis. You have Harris Stowe University, and you also have Lincoln University, found in southern Missouri, Jefferson City, Missouri, which was created by former enslaved Africans who fought during the Civil War. These were Civil War veterans. They didn't ask anybody to do this. They had fought for their freedom. They were well armed, and the next process was to learn how to read and write. And they set up this school, and they financed this school. So many of these HBCUs were not set up by the government, but they were later incorporated by the government because the federal government felt a need to control how African Americans were educated, because they no longer wanted to work on these plantations. They wanted to read. They wanted to be doctors and nurses also. Not saying that you don't need farmers. And many of them remain laborers in the South, unforcibly. I mean, up until very recently, into the 1960s, right? But you had those who wanted to branch off and do other things. And the government saw this as, the elite of this country and the federal government saw this as a threat to white mainstream, who were complaining that you have too many of these skilled black laborers being produced by these independent black schools. And even during the Civil War, they found out that there's a book by James Anderson, The Education of Blacks in the South, that says that right after the Civil War, many white northern missionaries would come down to the South and thinking that they were going to educate these poor, wretched black people. And they found out that there were more than 500 independent black schools immediately after the Civil War, all over the South, right? So black people were already doing what they did before they came to this country. So they were brought here.
It was always something that was held in high regard and very, very important.
It was very important, and that was our struggle, was to control our education, because in controlling your education, you control your destiny, and you teach a generation how to survive. And a lot of people think education is about getting a job. No. As I started off, education is about survival from the very beginning. What a squirrel teaches a baby squirrel is how not to get eaten by a hawk or a snake. It's about survival.
That's right.
Right? And so we understood that you had to control your own education to survive in a hostile, racist society that had enslaved us. And we had to train people. People had to be trained in how to train other generations how to survive.
So let me ask you this, because I know a little bit about your background, but I'd like you to talk about your particular, I guess you could say, what HBCUs have meant for you, and the fact that I think you did your undergrad, your master's, and your PhD at HBCU. And so what has been the impact of the HBCU for you personally, as well as, how would it be different today if you were doing it versus when you did it? I guess you started back in the 80s when you first started your undergrad and whatnot. So just a little bit about, what it's meant for you personally and where you are today.
Well, for me, coming out of St. Louis County, like a lot of young people who choose to go to HBCUs, I went because of culture. I even talked to my family about what schools to go to, and they said I should go to an HBCU. I was playing football in high school. I initially started off at a community college in St. Louis, only because I had the death of a little brother, so I missed that first year. But the next year I walked on and played football at Southern University, and going there, it was like I was in this utopia, because I had never in my life seen so many educated black people. I mean, everybody was the medical doctors, it was like so overwhelming, and I immediately wanted to be like that. I said, wow, this is possible. And that was the first time that someone even said that, oh, you can be a doctor. I'm like, me?
So when you went to the HBCU, that's what inspired you?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, I didn't have this in high school. I went to a predominantly, the school I went to was ethnicity, demographically, it was 50-50 black and white, but most of the teachers were white, right? So we didn't learn a lot about African-American culture, let alone Africa and our connection to the African world. So going to this historically black college, it was like being in Little Africa, And I went during the 80s at the height of the apartheid movement against South Africa. That was real strong on my campus, and so there was a lot of activism going on. But more importantly, the professors, everybody pushed you, and I had less than remedial skills. I'm not ashamed to say it. I received a 13 on my ACT. But I'm doctor now. Right. And I got a PhD from one of the most prestigious universities in the world, Howard University. But because of those HBCUs, because of that culture and that encouragement that I received, I was constantly told that you can do better. You have to do better. You have to do things better in this society. And so that had a tremendous impact on me. Even when I flunked out of Southern University because I was into football, I went to Texas Southern and got my degree and went back, received my master's at Southern, and then went off to seminary at Emory University for a while, then went to Howard University and received my PhD in history in the African diaspora world.
Okay, so somewhere around that time, I think that's when we got to know each other. And I like I said before, I came to your graduation at Howard, and I remember when you started working with Elizabeth State University, and that was a big thing. And then you got the offer to go to Delaware State, and I remember how excited you were, like, oh yeah, finally, I'm going to be going to this. I think it was a step up for you at the time. Because if I'm allowed to say, some of the things that I do know at Elizabeth State University, you took a lot of flack for trying to be publishing papers and things of that nature. Like they found that to be a problem for some reason. Well, so it wasn't conducive to academic freedom and to furthering yourself as a doctor.
Right.
So when you get without going, we won't pick on Elizabeth City State today, but
next time. There's a whole nother hour's program.
But you get to Delaware State, you have this new position, you're in the North now, you're no longer in the South, so you're probably thinking this is a different environment, more academic freedom, you'll be able to do your publishing. And so what happens to make you want to
write?
Well,
I noticed that. I really noticed this at Elizabeth City State University, and I actually started the research there around 2007, and I left Elizabeth City State University in 2008 to go right after Obama was elected. I'm like, wow, I can be closer to D.C. I really thought I was going to get some in the White House because I did such a big job for President Obama, but none of that materialized. But I noticed that it was much more hostile at Delaware State University than it was at Elizabeth City State University, and they didn't hide it. I mean,
so what happened? What's like the first thing that happened that just told you like?
The first semester, the first month of my first semester at Delaware State University in early September, one of the European American white professors, senior professor who's the president of the AAUP, the American University is an acronym for a union that represents university professors, the AAUP. And he walked in my office, shut the door, and said, I'm going to tell you this one time. The way that you're teaching in your African American history classes, you're offending some of the white students, and you're offending some of the white faculty who listen to your lectures because you speak so loud. They say that you're too black.
Wow.
And we don't want that at this university. And I'm like, well, as far as I know, Delaware State is a black college and it's federally protected.
Right.
And he said, well, I'm just telling you now, if you're not careful, you're going to find your way. You're going to be out of this university very soon. Wow. He let me know. And I was like, whew, how bold. And from then on, I mean, the white professors in my department, which they were the majority at a historically black college.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Now, when you were in school, like at Southern and TSU, no. It wasn't like that.
It was predominantly black professors. If you had, like the history department had 10 to 15 faculty at Southern University, 2 or 3 would be white.
So some people may say, well, is it because there's no qualified black professors? What happened to the black professors? Where'd they go?
Well, as my research is showing, that they were systematically taken out. And even when I was at Delaware State University in Dover, Delaware, and Delaware is a small state, but it's the first state in the country. I was told that Delaware State, I mean, the white faculty will walk up to me and say, Dr. Issa, this school is going to be like Bluefield State or West Virginia State University.
Bluefield State?
Yeah, and I'm like, what is a Bluefield State? I've never heard of that before. I was like, that's a black college? I played college football. We didn't play them. I played at Southern. I don't recall those road trips.
Right.
And so I look and I'm like, I'll never forget this. I went back to my office. I'm like, Bluefield State? Oh, historically black college. I went and looked at the demographics. I said, there are no black people.
So
I said, how do you have a historically black college without black people? That's like having a Jewish college without having Jewish people, or Notre Dame without Catholic priests. So,
and it still has a designation as a historically black.
Millions of dollars of federal funding.
Wow.
Millions and millions.
Wow.
And so these two schools, and they were saying that Delaware State was going to be just like it. And so I said,
now, what are the demographics at Delaware State when you first came in?
When I got there, well, the department, like I said, was predominantly white, my department. And there were very few African-American faculty at that school, which shocked me. And I saw that transformation taking place at Elizabeth City State University also. But I didn't know that, there was a history within this. And so the students at that time were about 70% when I first got there. I understand it's in the 60s now, or maybe even lower than that. I'm not sure. Haven't been there, but anybody can go on the federal website, the Department of Education, and find out.
So you started researching West Virginia. Is it what's the name? West Virginia?
Bluefield State and West Virginia State. Both of them are in West Virginia.
And they're no longer really black majority.
They're historically black colleges by name.
By name only.
By name only, but they're not historically black colleges because they have no faculty, or less than 2 or 3% African American faculty, unless I think Bluefield State has like 7% African American. West Virginia State may have 10%. But they're still receiving federal funding that is geared toward African Americans.
So I think this is what motivated you to go and look into that law, and then you start taking some further action after that.
Right. I mean, while I was doing my PhD at Howard University, I was fortunate enough to work as an archivist for the national government, the National Archives and Records Administration, located in D.C. in College Park, Maryland. And so I had a unique skill to go into an archive and look at records, federal records. And so I decided to just look up federal policy on HBCUs. And there's an act that I talk about in my first article and in the second article of how black colleges are turning white, that says that the Higher Education Act of 1965, which was written by Adam Clayton Powell, who was the chairman of the Education Committee. And basically in that act, it says that an HBCU is any college or university whose primary function is the education of black Americans. And from that act, federal funding is appropriated for African Americans. It's almost like our reparations. That's our reparations money, right? To be educated, the right to be educated in our own cultural standards, the right to be taught the history of Booker T. Washington and Frederick Douglass and Martin Delany and Nat Turner and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Malcolm X and Dr. King, right?
I would like to read something from the first article just quickly because you were speaking about how education speaks to survival,
right? And
how to be able to really just maintain yourself.
Sure.
And in your first article, you said that you said furthermore, according to the Washington Post, the post-racial world that many hoped for with the election of President Barack Obama may just be an illusion. Relying on recent report from the Pew Research Center's social and demographic trends, the Washington Post noted that the typical white household in 2009 had 20 times more wealth, which at $113,000, than the typical black household at like $5,600. Moreover, another report was conducted by Brandeis University in May of 2010 and concluded that African Americans will never reach wealth parity with that of white Americans. Both reports note that the African Americans with college degrees stand a better chance at edging out a decent life in the United States than those without degrees. So we were even talking before how, it was one thing to have a job to, allow you to maintain. It's another thing to actually have wealth that allows you to kind of withstand some of the ups and downs. And so now with you finding this information, and now these black, historically black colleges are no longer serving their demographic. Some might say, well, where are these black students going? Are they going to white colleges now? Are they going somewhere else?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I think my second article addresses that a little. And remember, in these articles, I'm writing to a general public. These are not, and so I'm keeping in mind that I'm writing to people who don't have PhDs. Like most academians, when they're writing to a select group of other scholars. And so I had to tell myself this is for the average person, someone who knows nothing about research. Right. So, yes, it was the historically black colleges that have historically created the black middle class. Right. And it was the historically black colleges in which sprang this modern civil rights movement and black power movement. It was out of these colleges that forced America to live up to its own democratic principles, which is enshrined in the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights. Right. And so, I remember in the beginning of writing the first part of the article, I was helping my daughter with her homework, and we were online, and she wanted to do something on Dr. King. I said, no, don't do something on Dr. Do something on someone you don't know. But I realized she really didn't know anything about Dr. King. And we did a video pulled up, and Dr. King was talking to a group of reporters about the Montgomery bus boycott. And he said, if we are wrong in exercising our constitutional right, the First Amendment, the right to assemble and petition government, then the Constitution is wrong. And for him to say that, it was poetic to me. He said, if we are wrong, then you're wrong. The founding fathers are wrong, right? And he said, we know we're not wrong, right? And so in that process, these HBCUs are what produce someone like Dr. King, Oprah Winfrey, right? Some of the first billionaires, HBCUs. And so what I saw in my research, because I went to these schools and I was affected by these schools and what came out of these schools, I said, wow, are they saying that they don't want any more Dr. Kings? Are they saying that they don't want any more W.E.B. Du Bois? Are they saying that they don't want any more Ida B. Wells? Right? So I'm saying, well, then, if that's what they're saying, that's not how I feel. So I decided to take it upon myself to let the general African-American community know with this article. Even when the first article, nobody would publish it, right? I couldn't find anyone to publish this article. They said it was too radical. Remove President Obama's name. Do this, do that. And I said, no, I'm not going to compromise what my research is showing me, right? And so I went to several mainstream black journals. They said, no, we're not going to touch it. And so the Black Agenda Report, because I had a friend whose father was an editor there, said, okay, we like this. We're going to give this a try. And when the article came out,
what happened?
It went viral, and my life changed.
Oh, okay.
And so the day that the article came out, in September the 7th, 2011, I got a call from the editor of the Black Agenda Report. He's like, Mr. Bruce Dixon. He said, man, whatever you said in that thing, people are downloading it like crazy. And I said, really? He said, maybe it's the title, you know, and because we say this stuff all the time on the Black Agenda Report, but there's something there that people are really interested in. And then I think about the fourth day of the article being out, someone sent a virus to the journal, the online journal, and shut it down for a week. And it,
for a week?
They totally encrypted everything.
Oh my God.
And they sent like a nuclear bomb through the internet. and he was like, man, next time you write an article, we're gonna have to have a total different website for you, you know. And I got a call from the White House, who was then the White House advisor on HBCU, whose name was Mr. John Sullivan. And he was a Morehouse graduate. And because I criticized him extremely in this article, right? And he said, you know, you need to come to the White House conference on HBCUs and see what we are doing and what the president is doing. And I went, and I wasn't that impressed. And I told him I wasn't impressed. And I said, I wanted to interview you in your office. And so I went to his office and interviewed him. And I asked him a question at the end of the 1 hour interview. I said, look, the way it's looking from my research, and it's not looking good, I'm about to do the second part of the article in a month or two. Will there be any black colleges in 20 years? He said, there will always be black colleges. I said, come on, man. This is one scholar to another. I'm not somebody in the streets. Will there be any black colleges left as we know them, with black professors and black students? Or will they all end up like Bluefield State? And he looked at me, he looked up at the ceiling, he looked down like that, and walked out of the room. Wow. Just like, this is the top President Barack Obama's hand-picked person to run all the HBCUs.
Okay, now speaking of that, I think you had mentioned before, what actually created that office?
The Civil Rights Movement.
The Civil Rights Movement.
Yes.
Created that
and
office.
It was actually, Tony Brown, Tony Brown's journal, he organized 100,000 young black people to go to the White House and protest because during the 70s, a group of elite in this country had decided they wanted to dismantle the schools, and he used his own money. He told tens of thousands of students, and he used 100,000 of his own money, and he brought them up to D.C. and they had a protest. And this is when Reagan was in office. And Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, believe it or not, the former governor of California, signed into action the first ever White House advisory on historically black colleges and universities, which meant that the black colleges were so important to America that they had a direct line to the White House. It was Ronald Reagan who did that. People think it was Jimmy Carter. No, it was Reagan who did that.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, this is the father, the granddaddy of white conservatism.
Right.
He's a god to the conservatives. He did this.
But you know, well, not to cut you off, but you were talking before about Dr. King, because also when I was looking at Dr. King and reading and listening to his speeches, I was surprised how many times he brought up the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and and you just touched upon that as well. And so, Tony Brown does this protest exercising their First Amendment rights for redress, and so as a result of writing this article, I guess your students find out, of course. And
yes.
what was their initial reaction when they?
Well, I would use it in class. I would give students, okay. Hey, I'm an activist. I'm an organic intellectual.
Right.
And I would, I would have students to read it for extra credit, and they were blown away because they saw this change going on right at Delaware State University. And many black students attend. They choose not to go to predominantly white schools to go to black colleges. Many of them could go to some of the top white schools, but they want the culture.
Right.
I mean, when I went to Southern University, I know I saw all those beautiful black women on the BET Bayou Classic, and I said, "That's where I'm going." Hey, I'm being honest. That was my initial reason. I said,
at least they got you there. That's
maybe I want to meet one of those young ladies. And so, but they were angry, and they eventually ended up having a protest March the 1st, 2012. I was about to put out the second part of the article, and I was set up and falsely arrested, brutalized, hospitalized, threatened with my life, arrested on my hospital bed. And the state.
And you arrested there because there's YouTube video out there that people can actually view. But I mean, what happened actually?
Well, I'm still under prosecution. I mean, we just had a trial September the 17th.
It's 2014, and you just said you're still under prosecution.
Yeah, almost 3 years. And the vice president's son, Mr. Joe Biden's son, Bo Biden Jr., is the attorney general, and he's prosecuting me on. And they gave me 4 initial charges of resisting arrest, failure to disperse, intentionally touching an officer, and causing a riot. And I guess they had to justify what they did to me, and they had to state behind them. And it's been almost 3 years, and my life has totally been destroyed. I lost my job. They fired me because I refused to take a plea, and because I didn't do anything wrong. I was exercising my constitutional rights to be outside with students who wanted to walk to the student administration building and grieve government.
So you were standing there, and a police officer they
walked up from behind and grabbed me. And
did they say why they were grabbing you? Or?
No.
Wow. Because later on it came out that, I think it was something about, okay, you didn't even organize. Was it your students that organized it?
My students organized it. I supported them.
You supported them, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy for that. Yeah.
Now,
I gave them, I was like, because this happens at every university.
So what are the rules in having
It's the Constitution. There are no rules.
Well, that's true.
That's the First Amendment.
But sometimes universities try to have their own little.
No little policy can overturn the United States Constitution.
This is true.
And so they tried to say that you needed to have a permit. And, but I didn't organize it, and I wasn't protesting, so I was just outside standing up. But because of we believe that it's because of this article that I wrote,
right,
and that and my attacks against the White House advisory on HBCUs, and how I came out and said, "Hey, it's the White House that's doing this," and that is systematic, and how dare they do that? Since African Americans put all efforts into making sure that the first black president was elected, I saw it as a slap in the face, and
But now it didn't begin under President Obama.
No, it didn't. No, it did not. But it accelerated.
It did accelerate.
Yeah, like sonic boom. it most definitely accelerated under him, and continues to have such a horrific impact on historically black colleges and universities, in which many Californians go to. Many, like almost 10% of all African Americans who graduate from school in California, they go to Spelman, Howard, Southern. I went to school. Some of my best friends at Southern University. Greg Williams,
that's right.
Texas Southern.
Right.
He left California to go to a historically black college, right? Greg Williams, he's now a big time photographer for Hollywood. So, yes. And also, in the state of California, in my second piece of my article, I began to look at what was happening in California, since I lived here for a brief time, and I had nieces and nephews who were born here. And I about 4 years ago, I decided to look at the California university system, their demographics as it regards emissions. And I was here doing Proposition 203 with Ward Connolly, where they ended affirmative action in higher education right here in California. And so I saw that after that proposition passed, where they ended affirmative action here, that fewer and fewer African Americans were going to the California State University system and the University of California system. And so I just decided to look at what was happening at what people nicknamed California's only HBCU.
So that's kind of getting to your second article. Right. So, because just want to ask you briefly, kind of before we get into more of that detail, and let me just back up to the reason I asked you about what the policy was at the university too, because I thought there was another protest that went on where one of the other professors had some protests going on with horses all going through the...
Oh, yeah. Well, like a year before the black students had their protests to grieve government, the white students had a protest. And many of those white students were my students, and they came to me first and asked me, Dr. Issa, you're always talking radical stuff. We want to have a protest. What do you think? And I said, you don't have to ask me. Just read the Constitution.
Right.
I would always refer them to the Constitution. We read this in class. Reread it. And you tell me what you can do. Right? And so the next thing I know, they had a protest. I walked outside and I see these young white ladies on horses. It's the equestrian team. And I think Delaware State was the only black HBCU with an equestrian team. And they were riding horses all around campus, protesting, calling the president of the university names because the school wanted to dismantle their equestrian team. They said it was too expensive and it wasn't beneficial to the students and to the university as a whole. And so no one was arrested.
No one. I was going to ask you, was anyone
arrested? The horses
arrested?
poo-pooed all on the campus. I saw the black maintenance people angry because they had to clean up this poo-poo. And it was amazing. I stood there, and they were like, Dr. Issa, hey, on their horses, and I'm like, wow.
Let me ask you this. Is the equestrian, is it still there?
Yeah, they sued the university. And
they kept it, huh?
And they kept that school. That's still there. But for some reason, they didn't want these black students talking about the dismantling of African Americans, faculty and students from a black college. That was too sensitive.
And I guess it has such far-reaching impacts because we're talking about how many HBCUs are there in the United States?
There are 105 historically black colleges and universities in the United States.
And would you say this is pretty much happening at all of them to some degree?
Well, if you look at the second article, I have a section called Fordyce versus the United States, right? And that was a Supreme Court hearing in 1992, where the Supreme Court basically said that the state of Mississippi's 4 HBCUs had been discriminated against as compared to the white schools, and that they were still segregated and they did not have the proper funding as compared to the white universities like the University of Mississippi, Mississippi State University. And so they were eventually awarded $500 million to upgrade. But the Supreme Court also said that we're not going to upgrade these schools if they remain black.
Interesting.
We're not doing it for private choice for black students. We're not doing it.
Now, I thought you said earlier that certain funds had been set aside for HBCUs.
Yeah, every year there are certain funds that are set aside to HBCUs, but most of those funds most of them. The White House says $5 billion or $3 billion, but I mean, if $3 billion got to HBCUs, then no student at an HBCU will pay for college. But that money is eaten up by consultancy firms.
Wow.
Before it even gets to these schools.
Wow, that sounds like another
study
article in itself, huh?
Well, I prefer that an economist do that because right. I don't like getting beat up on campuses.
So speaking of the second article, you brought something to my attention that was really striking, and it was a speech that was given by W.B. Du Bois in 1960 at Johnson C. Smith University in North Carolina. Before, I guess, not too long before he left the United States and went to Accra, Ghana.
Ghana, yes.
Now, I'm assuming, I never heard of is Johnson C. Smith University
It's a historically black college in North Carolina, yes.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read from this, and then it'll take us into kind of where we are today. You just had your second article, came out yesterday, right? After almost, what has it been, 3 years now?
3 years.
So we're going to talk about the second article, and then maybe we'll go back a little bit and talk about kind of what you've been experiencing, because you really haven't got into just why it took 3 years. The American Negro has now reached a point in his progress where he needs to take serious account of where he is and whither he is going. Yet this situation is in sight, and it brings, not as many assume, an end to the so-called Negro problems, but a beginning of even more difficult problems of race and culture. Because what we must now ask ourselves is, when we become equal American citizens, what will be our aims and ideals, and what will we have to do with selecting these aims and ideals? Are we to assume that we will simply adopt the ideals of Americans and become what they are or want to be, and that we will have in this process no ideals of our own? That would mean that we would cease to be Negroes as such and become white in action, if not completely in color. We would take on the culture of white Americans, doing as they do, thinking as they think. Manifestingly, this would not be satisfactory. Physically, it would mean that we would be integrated with Americans, losing, first of all, the physical evidence of color and hair and racial type. We would lose our memory of Negro history and of those racial peculiarities which have long been associated with the Negro. We would cease to acknowledge any greater tie with Africa than with England or Germany. We would not try to develop Negro music and art and literature as distinctive and different, but allow them to be further degraded, as is the case today. As I've said before, and I repeat, I am not fighting to settle the question of racial equality in America by the process of getting rid of the Negro race, getting rid of black folk, not producing black children, forgetting the slave trade and slavery and the struggle of emancipation, or forgetting abolition, and especially of ignoring the whole cultural history of Africans in the world. Take, for instance, the current problem of the education of our children. By the law of the land today, they should be admitted to the public schools. If and when they are admitted to these schools, certain things will inevitably follow. Negro teachers will become rarer and in many cases will disappear. Negro children will be instructed in the public schools and taught under unpleasant, if not discouraging, circumstances. Even more largely than today, they will fall out of school, cease to enter high school, and fewer will go to college. Theoretically, Negro universities will disappear. This is in 1960. And I'm going to read that again. Theoretically, Negro universities will disappear. Negro history will be taught less or not at all. And as in so many cases in the past, Negroes will remember their white or Indian ancestors and quite forget their Negro forebears. Some are ashamed of themselves and their folk. They regard the study of Negro biography and the writing of Negro literature as a vain attempt to pretend that Negroes are really the equal of whites. That tends to be the point of view of those of our children who are educated in white schools. They are going to be schools which do not discriminate against colored people, and the number is going to increase slowly in the present, but rapidly in the future until long before the year 2000, there will be no school segregation on the basis of race. The deficiency in knowledge of Negro history and culture, however, will remain, and this danger must be met, or else American Negroes will disappear. Their history and culture will be lost. Their connection with the rising African world will be impossible. So, we've read that into the record. And, you know, every time I read it, it's just very powerful. It's prophetic, you know, in a lot of ways. And I think it shows a side of Du Bois that a lot of people aren't really that aware of, you know.
No, Du Bois was a ride or die until he died. And in fact, when he died in Ghana at the ripe age of 95, the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, followed him like he was a 23-year-old. You would have thought that he was 23 years old, the way that they wrote reports about him. But it was the ideals. His ideals influenced the rise of African independence, right? His ideals influenced the rise in the end of colonialism, European colonialism all over the world. In China, there's a W.E.B. Du Bois department at the University of Beijing, and it's been there for 35 years, right? So Du Bois' influence on the world was stupendous.
You said something before, too, about the Pan-African movements, the African liberation movements, and said that if it were not for HBCUs, we may not have seen the independence in Ghana and these other parts of the world, like you said, Nkrumah.
Oh, there's no doubt. Yeah. Nkrumah was educated at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Ezekwe, Nigeria's first president, was educated at Howard and Lincoln University. And these HBCUs were the catalyst for African independence. So there's no doubt without these schools, we wouldn't know Africa as we know it as an independent continent.
It created a environment for dialogue, and
yes.
A lot of these guys, like Nkrumah, isn't that where some of them met their counterparts in the United States and developed lifelong friendships as well?
Most definitely, yes. Even me, myself.
Right.
I have friends who are now secretaries of state of African countries in Kenya, in Ethiopia. And one of my first best friends, he's going to be the next one of the senators in Liberia. And so it was at these HBCUs, yeah.
Wow. So it does show like what they hold in terms of allowing for people to be able to be self-determining and to be to create. And and a lot of people look at that as a threat, but I think there's those who are more of goodwill and in the human family that see when one group is doing well, that helps other groups do well because it strengthens the entire human family.
Most definitely. Look, there have been a lot of articles that have come out, and a lot of journalists, particularly white journalists, making the statement that HBCUs, it's time that do we need them anymore, right? But you never hear them say that, do we need Catholic universities or Native American universities or Notre Dame? Do we need Brandeis universities? It's this systematic attack on historically black colleges because they force the American elite to live up to the Bill of Rights. If you look at what's happening in Ferguson, right, this whole issue of the militarization and the National Guards coming in and them telling the people that they can't march, they can't grieve government. Right. And them
free
saying
free speech,
yeah, free speech zones. I mean, come on. The federal courts have already ruled that this is unconstitutional. Right. And even just recently, there was a picture of a young lady fighting with an elderly white man over a flag because she decided to turn the American flag upside down. Because to her, America was not living up to its creed that is enshrined in the Bill of Rights. So she said that she was going to make a constitutional free speech and turn it upside down. She didn't burn it. Right. And the guy took the flag from her.
And my understanding is that's actually that goes back in history. It's a symbol of distress.
Yes.
That's really all it is.
That's all.
It's a symbol of distress.
That's all it is.
It's not to say we hate this system because I think there's a lot that this system has given to the world and it holds as possibility.
No doubt.
It seems like many people, it really seems like the subversion today is coming from, as you put it, the so-called elite, in terms of
Well, that's what we talk about in our articles that this series of books that came out in the 1990s, Samuel Huntington's and Arthur Schlesinger.
So we were talking earlier about where this attack really is originating, and it appears that it comes from, for lack of a better word, the so-called elites. And you had mentioned an author by the name of Samuel P. Huntington, and he wrote a book called Who Are We? Can you talk a little bit more about?
Well, Samuel P. Huntington. Also, you have Arthur Schlesinger, a few other people, Clarence Walker. During the late 1990s and the 2000s, to combat what was taking up place at these historically black colleges, this African-centered movement, which basically is an outgrowth of the Black Power movement, and it reaches the college campuses. And so we have this rise in African-centered literature, particularly that dealing with antiquity, and that and this is being taught in mainstream colleges and universities. Many of us remember the serious issues that went on with Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who's a professor at City College in New York, and Dr. John Hendrick Clark, and Dr. Van Sertima, Alvin Van Sertima. And that period represented a tremendous threat to American or European educational hegemony or dominance over academia. And it was almost like they were systematically dethroned. And it made many of their disciplines, particularly that in the classics area, irrelevant, ahistorical, which they were. But they didn't take it well. Schools like Yale University was granted $100 million, $10 million to combat this Afrocentric movement. And it played itself also in hip hop, had a tremendous impact on hip hop. Tupac Shakur, Public Enemy, Fight the Power, X-Clan. Now you have this stuff being played in popular American culture. Michael Jackson, Remember the Time. So and you have white youth are starting to adopt this. And so culture is very important to a group of people, right? And so they understand that. The elite understand this. That's why they want these HBCUs gone, And so they started to combat it. So they wrote these books. And these books are now being used. These are the center drive on Common Core, the dismantling of the American educational system as we know it. Right, to make people more interested in spectacle than literacy, right? In fact, there's a book by a New York Times bestseller and the former foreign correspondent for the New York Times. His name is Christopher Hedges. He wrote a bestseller called "The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle," right? Where he's saying that now with the corporate takeover of Americans' universities, there's no emphasis on critical thinking anymore, right? They want people to just be robots.
So how does that relate to Common Core? Because you also spoke about Common Core.
Well, the Common Core in places like Arizona and Texas, the state of Arizona has banned ethnic studies, right? You can't teach anything like Africana studies, African American studies, anything other than this Protestant Anglo-Saxon history and literature and social sciences, psychology. You can't teach anything other than what comes from Europe, right? And you can't teach Mexican American, indigenous people before the coming of Europeans. You can't teach that. And so they want to control the narrative, right? It's almost borderline Nazism. Or totalitarian remnants of a totalitarian dictatorship where the government controls every aspect of people's lives, like in North Korea, right? And so they saw this as a threat, and this is their response to it. And in doing this, right, they're responding to the African-centered movement where Malifi Asante and people like that, I think Dr. Karanga, are the leaders in bringing this form of African culture to the forefront of American mainstream academic life, right? And this had never been done before, because culture is the basis for human understanding. People say race. I mean, what is a race, really? Is there a such thing as race? I mean, we say we're black and white, but as long as a Homo sapien from South Central LA can procreate with a Homo sapien from Eastern Europe or Southern China and produce an offspring, that dispels this false concept of race. So culture stands as the greatest barrier or the greatest surplus to understanding human behavior. And they've always understand that. So this ideological war, a cultural war that people like W.E.B. Du Bois waged, Ida B. Wells, is now at the forefront of American thought, and they want to dismantle it. And so Common Core comes in, where they control the curriculum, where history starts, as far as black people, with slavery, right? Wow. We don't want to talk about immigrants having any ideals and thought outside of what happened in the United States, right? But even to do that means that you lost the cultural war, because you're being reactionary now. And even the mainstream white youth or European American youth have done a coup d'etat on that. Even a few weeks ago in Colorado, last month, the students at a suburban school district, several school districts, they walked out of school. They said, we don't want to hear this. We have so much information at our disposal because of the internet, and you're trying to tell us that slavery was okay and that possibly no black people were involved in iniquity in the ancient Egypt. And we're starting to understand that not only were black people involved in ancient Egypt, that they had a major influence on Greece and Rome. The stuff that you told us was Anglo-Saxon, right? And so they are rejecting that. So the response to this is Common Core, and that's being pushed by the Association of United States Governors, right? They're pushing that, and people are angry about that. And these books represent the catalyst of what many of these governors and these in every state, the Department of Education, like in California and Delaware, they're using these books that we just talked about as the basis to retrain people on American culture and history.
What's interesting about it, because you mentioned in that article that Chris Hedges wrote that the corporate takeover of education is also jeopardizing critical thinking. And I remember reading something on Common Core where they were debating some of the curriculum, and they were saying there's only like our answer, we don't have any room for your thought. And so I can see how that's not just a threat to so-called black people, that's a threat to all people to say, yes, to turn you into, like you said, robots or automatons, where you just, are basically
sort of like what's going on in North Korea.
Well, there you go.
Nothing we say is wrong, but exactly, we're doing it right. It's being done right under our eyes. And so people like me who can articulate and understand this and then disseminate this information to a mass group of people, you become dangerous in their eyes.
So what are the cuts that you said, so some cuts were accelerated in 2009 at HBCUs?
Right. From 2012 to 2011,
you mean 2009?
2009 to 2012, there were a tremendous amount of cuts that came out of the White House. And in my original article, I took that out because people were like, oh, if you say bad things about Obama, black people are not going to listen. They don't care. He can do anything, and they don't care. So I took it off. Well, since then, MSNBC, NPR, National Public Radio, National Public Radio, Time magazines, and a host of other mainstream American media outlets have been talking about these cuts, that these Parent Plus loan cuts that took place from 2010 to 2012, that in which more than almost 30,000 black students at historically black colleges, some from California, were not able to go to college because of that. And it forced some schools to even, Paul Quinn University was forced to shut down.
Wow.
Right? And
the great debate was centered at Paul Quinn. Is that Waco, Texas?
Yeah, it's in Waco, Texas. Yeah. Like and so other schools like Howard, Hampton, they all lost a tremendous amount of revenue from this. And I think in all it was $165 million. And so the many HBCU presidents and organizations and lay societies threatened to sue the White House over this. And they're like, come on, President Obama. I mean, in 2009, you cut HBCUs by $85 million, and you increased the funding to Hispanic universities and colleges. And then you tell us, okay, we're going to take care of that. And then your second term, you come and cut out the Pell Plus loan. You cut off the main artery to these schools. And so I'm reminding the reading audience that these cuts didn't start in 2012. They started as soon as President Obama got in office. And so I'm giving you primary sources where to go and look and see where these cuts are coming from.
And you spoke of California, and California's unique. We don't have technically a HBCU here, but you also said there are trends happening here as well that are very important for people to be aware of.
Right, like I mentioned earlier, many schools, the California State University system, the California University system, which comprises of UCLA and Cal Berkeley and things like that, and University of San Diego, and then you have San Diego State University, then you have Cal State LA, Dominguez Hills. African Americans their numbers have decreased tremendously over the years. I think California is disproportionately affected, and I think that's why I think we need to start here and looking at what's happening to African Americans in higher education here, we can begin to get a synopsis of what's going on all over the country, right? So I decided to look at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and it was always known
what's
as...
What's the background of Cal State Dominguez Hills for California?
It was created by Governor Pat Brown in the aftermath of the Watts riots, and he basically said we need a place to put these disenchanted students, minority students, to give them a chance to upper mobility in American society. And so Cal State Dominguez Hills is created for minority students. I mean, it's in the charter, right? And so from its inception, Cal State Dominguez Hills, the African American population always hovered in the beginning from over 45 to 50%, right? And then up into the early 2000s. And then around 2000 onward up to 2007, it was at about 30%, 33 to 31%. And then in 2007, President Garcia, who was the president from 2007 to 2012, she's now at Cal State Fullerton, became the president. And under her tenure, we saw this school, which had the largest amount of African-American student population, dwindle from 31% to 17% as of last year. We don't know what it's gone down this year because they haven't published the data yet, right? And so we're like, what is going on? So at that rate, in about 7 years, it will be below 4%. And we can see the same numbers. UCLA only has about 3 to 4% African Americans at its school. Berkeley, less than that. And so
which is a lot less than it was, say, in the 80s.
Oh, in the 80s, 8 to 9%.
Wow.
Now it's almost down to 0. So where are all of these African American students going?
That was my question. Where are they?
Well,
going?
many of them are going to community college, but even those 90% of those who are going to community colleges, they're not graduating. So where are they going? Well, they're going to, there's a pipeline to prison. It's a pipeline, and that's why I say if we're not careful in this country, we're at a crossroad. And if we're not careful, we will be re-enslaved. And someone said, well, what do you mean by that? How can you be re-enslaved? Well, if you look at what's happening with what Michelle Alexander has said in her New York Times bestseller, The New Jim Crow, this pipeline to prison, which has disproportionately affected all of Black America. Right? And in the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution clearly states that volunteer slavery is over with, except this clause, if you are convicted of a crime. So slavery is over with, according to the 13th Amendment, unless you are convicted of. So if you are convicted of a crime, according to the Constitution of the United States, you are a slave. And so African Americans are only 12% of the population, but yet we represent, in many instances, 40 to 50% of the prison population. We're enslaved. And once you get that felony on your name, it's almost impossible to come back. And so if we're not going to college, if they're not providing our taxpayers dollars that we pay taxes to, and I like to tell young people, it's not about just doing a easy 1040. When you go out and buy gas, you're paying taxes. When you buy your niece and nephew 9-laters, I don't know if they do that anymore, M&M's, you're paying a tax on it. You go buy a loaf of bread, a percentage of that money is going toward your education. But yet it's not being used for us. And we're not even making the demands.
You know, I don't think people really know the gravity of the situation, and if you just follow these numbers, if you go from 40% to 17% at just one university, and we look at this happening all over the country, what will be the outcome? We know that it's not gonna be a very good one. You talk more in your article. I thought it was really interesting. You spoke to this blog, I guess a blogger for the Chronicle of Higher Education, and her name is Naomi Schaefer Riley. And she wrote the most persuasive case for eliminating Black studies. So even at the universities, the Black studies and Africana studies are under attack as well. It seems.
Oh yes, they are trying to eliminate them. Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, they had one of the most progressive Africana studies departments in the country. UCLA, one of the professors there, Scott Brown, I think you may know him. Well, he received his master's degree there, right? And a lot of, and this is an Ivy League school, but they had a very progressive, they were really dealing with cutting edge research as it regards the African world. And they dismantled that program last year, 2 years ago. It's gone, as we know it. It's gone. Temple University, there's been a tremendous fight on dismantling the program at Temple. And Temple's University's African American Studies program, or Africana Studies, is the first PhD in American and world history in African American culture ever. And they put out so many PhDs in that department. And they're trying to dismantle it. There was a big fight even at Cal State Long Beach here in California to dismantle that program, right? So this attack on our culture and our history is systematic, right? And so the HBCUs are a part of that. It's not just about HBCUs. It's not just about Africana studies. It's about African American culture. The gift that we have given the world, despite going through what we've gone through during enslavement. Just recently, I was watching the student protests in Hong Kong, and I saw the students there singing our chants from Ferguson. Hands up, don't shoot. Right. That form of culture outpouring. Right. They're taking that on. So the impact is tremendous. So they have to dismantle, in their own minds, I guess they feel they must dismantle our education. But what we're saying in this article, no. You know, we have to let our people know what's going on. And that there's nothing wrong with having historically black colleges. There's nothing wrong with African Americans being the most democratic group of people in this country, as was expressed in the 2008 election. You know, I mean, so no, we have a right to exist. Our culture and our tradition, as Du Bois said, has a right to be here, but we're at a crossroad. Du Bois wrote this article in 1960. And 55 years, was it 65 years? What's that, 40? 50-something years later, we're seeing it. HBCUs, Negro universities are disappearing. Black students are not going to school. We are being dismantled. We are being taught in unpleasant circumstances and environments in the primary schools where they are now arresting kids, black kids in primary schools, and putting them in handcuffs and incarcerating them.
I always say to myself, if we had that kind of stuff growing up, I don't know how we would have made it.
It's an attack. Even on the primary level, primary and secondary level, more than 200,000 African-American school teachers were fired under the Obama administration. Really? Wow. So we're seeing this closing down. I don't know what's happening here in Los Angeles, but in Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware, and other places, we're seeing this closure of urban schools all over the country that's having a tremendous impact on African Americans. And we're seeing the rise of the prison industrial complex, where states like California and Delaware are spending more money on prisons than they are on education. And it's us who are disproportionately being re-enslaved. And so this is a tremendous issue, and I'm excited that God has used me to deal with this, but it has been at a tremendous sacrifice, you know. But, you know, I'm still alive. Yeah. I'm still smiling. I'm still fighting. You know, people like Dr. King and Malcolm X, they didn't get to live to be past 40.
That's right.
And so I'm blessed that I can carry on that tradition in the way that I know how, in the best way that I can.
And, you know, one thing that you share with me, too, that I think is something important to share, as you've been going through this situation in Delaware, some of your support has come from some what people would consider to be unlikely sources.
Amazing. I mean, believe it or not, in Delaware, most of the African-American community, they don't want to touch me out of fear that if they're associated with me, they may lose their jobs. Right, and so none of the black politicians, they don't want to deal with me. In fact, they've marginalized my name so much that I'm this bad monster because I'm talking about these very sensitive issues that are going on. In fact, during my trial, the Deputy Attorney General who was prosecuting me in September said that I'm spewing out conspiracy theories. And I said, well, if you want to call the data that you are releasing conspiracy, then right. You know, then you are the conspiracy theorist, not me, right? So I've gotten a lot of support from white conservatives, and I'm a registered Democrat. My mama was a Democrat, right? And so I come out of mainstream Black America that has been Democratic, been with the Democratic Party since Theodore Roosevelt. So Franklin Roosevelt, that is. I'm sorry.
You're right, Franklin, right. FDR,
so, FDR, right. And so, but a lot of support has come from the very Tea Party members. They've written articles about me when we were really talking about the lynchings that were going on in Delaware. They were the ones that would come down and write. Christine O'Donnell, wow. the quote-unquote Tea Party witch, came down and did an investigation, and she's like, this is really sad. What's going on? They're more concerned. And
I think because they see, even if they're not particularly interested in what's happening at the HBCU, they see that your rights are being violated based upon the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
And they know that if your rights, everyone's rights are at jeopardy.
Exactly. Right. And that's what they're concerned about, dismantling of the Constitution. Will martial law be called in this society? Will the Constitution of the United States be dismantled? Because that's a very serious issue.
How can somebody, a charge that was given in 2011, They gave you 4 when you go to trial. Finally, in September, it's only 1, which is resisting arrest. So it takes 3 years for them even to bring it to court. You know, and I guess, you know, without, you know, I don't want to overstep any bounds, but it was a hung jury. You know, we can talk about that a little bit, but I can say, you know, because I remember when you wrote the article, because right when you wrote the article, you were here in Los Angeles. You remember 2011.
I remember.
And you were like, ooh, something's about to happen. We had no idea, you know, what was about to happen. And then, you know, of course, the protests happened. And then, you know, there's a lot of things you've left out in terms of what you've really had to go through. And it has been a hardship and it's been a sacrifice. And, you know, this is definitely something that if we support anything, we should support this. You know, and so, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about what you've experienced, what your next steps are, and also how people can help you, and how people can get in contact with you.
Okay,
and things like
no
that.
problem. Well, I've lost my job, which is unparalleled because generally, I mean, if you're charged with crimes, you're innocent until proven guilty in any court in the United States. But because of my activism regarding saving these historically black colleges, and now I'm trying to put at the forefront the issue of African Americans maintaining their capabilities of going to predominantly white schools, and those numbers are dwindling all over the country. And then the attack on Africana studies. Obviously, we hit a nerve, and you know, we said that the emperor has no clothes. And we warned the alarm. Hey, he's naked. And so they hit back. And so because of that, for the last 3 years, I've been unemployed and unable to find work. But I've survived, you know, little by little. And of course, I was separated and going through a divorce presently. And it's been rough. It's been rough. You know, it's not something that I wanted, and I wouldn't put this on anybody. You don't go to school and to matriculate from bachelor's, master's to PhD to professor to have your life dismantled for exercising your constitutional rights. But this is where we're living at. And if they did it to me, they'll do it to someone else. I think even Angela Davis even said that they came for me in the night. They're going to come for you in the morning. And so I'm grateful after giving my presentation at Christ Unity Center last night, day before yesterday, that the group there said, hey, this is important. We got your back. And this is the dismantling. We see it now. We knew something was going on, but we didn't understand. Thank you, Dr. Issa. And that means everything to me, because it took me 3 days to realize after my trial. The trial lasted 8 days, believe it or not.
8 days
on one misdemeanor, right? 8 days. And the jury was in jury for 3 days and deliberating. And all it takes is one person to say he's guilty. If you have 12 people, all it takes is one, and it's a hung jury. Right. So it was 3 days afterwards that I realized, I said, wow, they really tried to incarcerate me, to make me a slave. And I mean, I cried that day. I was at a friend's house in D.C., and it hit me. I said, you know, this is wrong. This is wrong. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get back to what I was doing. I'm going to write this second article. And it was so difficult for me to write for 3 years because I knew this is the reason why they came after me. So I said, man, they're going to really kill me now. And so I wrote this one, and I have another one coming out, the last one.
Yeah, you have your third one. You say it's going to be coming out soon.
Yeah, and it's going to show us who's doing this, why they're doing it, and how to stop it.
And so people who want to support you, they can donate to your legal defense fund. They can also just give you donations so that it'll allow you to create the space.
Yes.
For you to create, you know, what you need to create.
I'm in desperate needs of funding. You know, I'm doing this. I'm pretty much homeless where I am now. I have a friend in Delaware who's allowing me to stay in his front room, and I've been there for a year. You know, I pretty much overstayed my visit, but he understands. He witnessed all of this. And he's like, man, I can't believe this is happening in 2014 and nobody's talking about it. Yeah, it's like it's been a media block out with my case, you know, and it's one of the biggest cases in American judicial system here, and it's been a media block out. And so, but for those who want to help, you know, we on our latest article, if you go to This Week Black Agenda Report, we have a crowd fund up, and you can make a donation there.
You have a project at Indiegogo.
Yeah.
And what we'll probably do at the end of this video, we'll roll that link so people can see it.
Yes.
And go to that Indiegogo.
And that's up for 30 days. So, I mean, by the time that this is finished, you know,
I think you can renew them though.
Yeah, you can renew them. Yes, I will renew them, and then of course, you know, I can come to any church or civic organization and speak. I have a PowerPoint presentation. This is so important, and this is not my area of expertise. I'm a Garvey scholar. So,
well, maybe there is some relationship. Now that you mention that, you know, it's just this is the time that we're in.
Yes, this is the time that we're in, and I felt, you know, because of these historically black colleges, I'm able to sit here and say that I'm doctor.
Right.
I'm Dr. Jahi Issa. I am somebody. I'm a thinker. You know, I'm an intellectual. And because people put energy and time and work with me. And so I felt a moral, ethical decision to really make this well known and I know that history will resolve me in the end. I'm at 100% absolutely sure that I am on the winning side of history, and this is the tortoise versus the hare, and I'm clear on that.
All right. Well, I'd like to, you know, personally just thank you.
Thank you
for doing your work and, you know, doing, you know, you what we say, those that dare to do, and there's just not many, you know, in this day and age in particular, that really are upholding that mantle, that high standard that was set by some of the names that you mentioned, like Ida B. Wells and Dr. King and others. And so thank you, and I know that there's many who don't even know your name that will thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. I
All
really
right.
appreciate it, and this opportunity to go public about it.
All right.